Welcome back everyone, I'm Tyler. Today on Wood Nerds, I'm going to show you how I built this router fence and the dust collection system that goes along with it. In part one of this build, I installed a router plate into my work surface, which is a really large assembly table that actually folds up against the wall. And I did that specifically to give me additional function and not have to take up more space. So now I have two work surfaces, a nice assembly table, and a router table combined in one that actually has very little footprint when it's up against that wall. In this video though, we're gonna focus just on the fence and the dust collection system. A couple things about this fence: it's got a sacrificial face, T-track on the top, which you can utilize featherboard and stops for. Featherboard's really good for keeping your workpiece flat up against your work surface as you run it through. It'll help prevent peaks and valleys from a shifting workpiece. The other thing is stops. Stops are really nice for stopped dados, stopped rabbits, and also repeatability. So if you have something like this that you need to slide through and you need it to stop here, but say you have like 10 of them, you can easily and quickly run them through and get those stopped cuts that way that they match exactly. Another really valuable thing about having a workspace like this and a fence like this is how large it is. In its current configuration, it's about 38 inches long with this little gap here. 36 if it was completely closed up, but you probably wouldn't use it like that very often. And because of the way that it's built, you can actually open this up even further if you want to, which will allow you to run a really long workpiece through. I bought a specific bit for this that I think I'll be able to use as a joiner as well. So dual purpose, but I'll be able to report on that later after some trial runs. But I don't want to chat too long about this. Let's go ahead and jump into the build. Here are the components I'm going to be using to make the fence. I bought these from Mike over at Taylor Tools. He's a cool guy, a regular woodworker just like us, and if you purchase these through the links I have down in the description, I'll get a little bit of kickback as well. To start off, I'm going to be cutting the first part of this extrusion in half on the miter saw, and then I'm also going to be cutting a little notch out, and this is going to be for the dust collection aspect. This is kind of how it's going to be orientated. These little right angle brackets also are available. They really helped out with the construction here, but I'm going to measure in 16 inches from each side, make some marks, and then use my speed square to kind of start the layout for this notch that I'm going to cut. Once I have all my markings here, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to use a drill press, and I'm going to drill right where these lines meet up and then use a jigsaw to get through. But getting the markings on here is a little complicated, so I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. I started using a machinist's square and lined it up at the top where I made those speed square marks, and then I just followed it straight down and drew the line up against the back edge of that right angle. Then to get the center of this recess marked out, I used a popsicle stick and cut it so it would fit perfectly, and then drilled a little hole there in the center, and then used that as basically like a sliding template to get the center mark here. As you can see, I'm kind of demonstrating. Not that well. Now that you have the markings where they intersect, I'm going to be using a punch so that my drill bit won't slip or spin around. And I just punched a couple different marks there. Again, just really more for guiding purposes. This doesn't have to be precise either. You can use the drill press like I'm going to, or you can use one of those handy little drill guides. I have a pretty nice one that I'll link down below that I've used for a bunch of different projects. Here it is right here. Yeah, this thing's been really handy. So all you do is you just really clamp it up, and then you use your hand drill to drill the hole, keep it nice and straight. But I made a couple holes side by side, that way I can fit my jigsaw blade in there. And to minimize my sucky jigsawing, I used my miter saw to cut a good portion of those slots out. And I'll have to finish this with the jigsaw. Before this, hadn't really cut any metal with my jigsaw, so this was kind of a first for me. But it was actually a lot easier than I was anticipating. After using it on those miter cuts, it actually gave me a lot more confidence that I figured that I'd easily be able to cut this other notch out. And that was really accurate. It again, surprisingly super easy to cut that out, and it was really, really straight. There are a little bit of waves, I guess, and so I just used a file to shore those up, and then cleaned up the edges of any like really burrs or any like sharp spots, because I'm pretty prone to screwing myself up on that stuff. Then I took the other full-length extrusion, these are 36 inches, and I cut that sucker in half. And afterwards, I'm just double-checking to make sure everything fits as it should. Go inside, tell my wife how excited I am, and she couldn't be any less excited. After bugging her, I'm going to cut some slots for the T-bolts, or T-track bolts, I don't know what you want to call it. But I'm lining them up here with the T-track that I have on my table. If you guys haven't seen the video already, check out how to put the router plate into an existing table video. I'll link it here. And again, I'm using the same techniques that I showed you originally, using that mechanics right angle, and I'm going to drill some holes right next to each other, and then I used the jigsaw to really finish everything up here. And again, this jigsaw was super helpful in getting this all shored up. I did probably 90% of the work, and then I just went back through with a file and cleaned everything up, because it wasn't perfect. I'm not perfect. I suck at jigsawing. I just have a cheapo Harbor Freight set of files, but man, they come in handy. And here's the hardware I'm going to use. I actually end up using something different than this, but you get the idea. So the T-slot bolts go into the T-track, and then the knobs hold it down when you tighten them, and then the little right angle brackets with those knobs allow you to move the extrusion around. The cool thing about these right angle brackets is they are adjustable. So this little screw right here allows you to pivot up and down, or left and right, or you can change the degrees and make sure that it's at a right angle or true to your tabletop. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to attach the little hood for the dust collection system, and I have this really handy package of bolts that fit these little T-slot nuts. Geez, I don't even know what to call these things, it's so annoying. But I'm going to drill a hole, and then I'm going to mount this baby right in place. But again, this thing is really cool. I've been using these for a while, and for woodworking, they've been really helpful. These also fit my threaded inserts. I try to keep all my thread patterns for a lot of the hardware that I keep around the same. This is 1/4x20, and again, I'll link this stuff in the description below, but it seems like 1/4x20 goes really well with a lot of woodworking tools from my experience. But as you saw, I drilled the holes, put those babies in there. I just hand tightened them for now. I'll go back through with some washers and really crank those down. I'm using 3/4 inch maple ply here. This is going to be for the Sacrificial fence. I'm marking out the slots, and again, I'm using that hardware to mount them here. I'm just kind of mapping it out so I know where I'm going to want to drill my holes. After that, I make my markings. It's going to be 2 inches in from each side, and then on the 9-inch mark in the center there. And again, I'm just kind of testing things out. I typically like to use a test piece first before going full bore on anything, but I'm going to use a Forstner bit to countersink these bolt heads, and then follow up afterwards with a drill bit that fits those bolts. Personally, I think this technique looks really good since the hardware has to be exposed. Since this is a Sacrificial fence, I may need to replace it in the future. But here I go, sliding it in place, tightening it down. This is really just a test fit. I just want to make sure that the idea, the concept that I have is still working, and it is. So I'm really excited. Nice and square as well. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hog out the rabbets, and this is where I'm going to put the T-track, and again I use a test piece first to make sure it works, and it does. Go ahead and fire this baby up, and the cool thing is the dust collection also worked. I mean, it's not perfect, but it did a pretty good job. And I really like how the hose detaches in the back there and I can suck up any mess. It's really hard to capture all of the dust, especially when you're taking off such like a huge piece. But having that hose detach right there that easily really helped out. These next 2 runs are going to be to put a 45-degree chamfer on the bottom. This is going to help any sawdust buildup as I'm using it and keep the pieces flat against the fence and not distanced away because of the sawdust. Now obviously I'm sanding everything down and I'm trying to hit all the edges so it's nice and soft. The 3/4 inch plywood, after I hollow out that rabbet, won't accept regular screws. I can't get anything less than a 3/4 inch screw. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to add another 3/4 inch piece of plywood on the back here, and that'll help accommodate the length of those screws and hold that T-track in really nice and tight. So all I do is I put everything up. You can see kind of how I have my spacers laid out and clamped it down, and then used a drill bit with basically like a depth stop. I just used some tape to make sure that I wasn't going too deep, and then screwed those babies in and assisted with a clamp on the edge there so they didn't come out of square, I guess, with that front edge. After that's all taken care of, I used some poly and sealed everything up. I sealed all sides. I suggest you do the same as well, even in the little bolt holes that you're going to be using. Once it dried, I tested out. Now I'm going to be using this T-track for a couple things. First off, I'm going to use it for these feather boards, which will be a nice addition. And I'm also going to cut this baby that I'm playing with right here, and I'm going to make a couple stops. So we'll do that in a second once I'm done screwing around. To measure these out, the stops, it's really simple. I just used basically a scrap piece of 3/4 inch ply, held it up against the fence, made a mark, flipped it over, made another mark, took the sucker over to the miter saw, and cut him out. After I did that, hold them up against the fence right where the T-track is, and just like we did earlier for the Sacrificial fence, I measured where I'm going to be drilling my holes, and then I just used from a cool little T-track kit that I have some bolts and knobs. And to give it a really nice slick finish, I used the paper bag trick, which is after you seal something, use a piece of paper bag and then run it on, and it kind of gets rid of any of the little lint bumps. I tried a couple different techniques for the dust collection system. The first one is to take one of these screw-on lids for a bucket, attach it to the bottom of the table here, and screw it in afterwards. I'm going to show you how I did this in case you want to do the same. I, after testing it out, don't recommend it. I've seen a lot of other YouTubers put together a dust collection system for their router table similar to this. Basically what I'm getting at is like an enclosed dust collection system. What happens is, as you're trying to suck the dust through the bottom port here, it covers the router. So you know that there's a lot of sawdust getting into the electric motor, and I don't think that that's going to be good for the longevity of this tool, so I chose to go a different route. Don't get me wrong, this is actually probably the best solution for dust collection aspect, but I just feel like it's not as good for the tool itself. This is what I ended up going with instead. So I took the little knobs off of this, right? And in their place, I used those threads to thread on this little template, I guess, that I cut out of the bucket. And then I punctured a couple holes in there, and then I just used some screws that had the same thread pattern that I had laying around and screwed them in. I then use a piece of twine to support the fitting here. It looks a little janky, but it actually works perfect. So you could use a wire, it's really up to you. I added another piece on the back to kind of help with the suction. So this did actually help. And I also added a feature on the top to help with the cord collection. So since my table folds up against the wall, I don't want the cord just hanging down all up in the way. And I'll show you that in a second. But here's where the dust collection port funnels into, and it's right where the bit will be. So again, this is in my opinion, one of the better methods for doing this and protecting the length of life of your tool. I ran a few boards through to kind of give you guys a show of example of how well the dust collection works. So as you can see on top, there's really like no dust. On the bottom, there's just a little bit after running those through. So again, no big deal in my mind. Now that everything's finished, I also wanted to show you how long it takes to set up from its stored position. It takes a couple minutes. Setting things up sucks, I get that, but you know, for the amount of space that I get when it's stored, the value way outweighs the setup time. But that's it, let's go back to the shop. That's it. Pretty easy. I have to say I'm really excited to have a router table and fence now. I'll be utilizing this in future videos. I've been really needing one. I've been trying to get around it by doing kind of like janky things. So having this is really gonna help up the quality of my builds and make things a lot easier on me. So here's the part of the video where I cheers you guys on a project complete. If you guys decide to build anything like this, do me a favor, reach out to me on my Instagram or Facebook and share. I would love to feature some of your builds, especially if you have better ideas than I do. This is just a starting template, really. There's plenty of cool things you can do to this, like add some storage for bits or quick access to tools and things to mess with the router on. So if you have any really cool ideas, please share them with me. I'd love to update the community on those. I do have 2 new supporters this round, and I wanted to give a special thanks out to them. The first one, Roman, thanks brother. He says, awesome channel, thanks for keeping it free. I think it encourages newbies to try something new. Hey, absolutely, man. Again, thank you for the support. And to Roman's point, I am trying to give you guys everything that I can free, all of the measurements, all of the materials, everything, without making you buy plans or anything like that. So thanks again, man. I'm glad that you appreciate that. And then my other buddy, Tyler, joined as a Patreon. He says if he's not working when he watches this video, he's gonna join in on the cheers. Otherwise, keep on keeping on. Thanks, Tyler, man. I hope you have your feet up and a cold glass with you. Cheers, everyone. Wish you well on all of your future projects. And if any of you are interested in supporting the channel, there's information on how to do that below. One of them is Patreon, the other is, you know, Venmo, things like that. So keep an eye out if you're interested. I don't want, you know, to put anyone in a weird situation or have your wives or husbands get mad at me because you threw some cheddar my way. But really, that's it, you guys. Thank you again so much for watching and building with me. I'll see you next time.